Greetings, Mason Storm here. On today's episode, I made some chocolate cookies, and then I made some sort of stuffing, and then applied the stuffing between the two cookies and sandwiched them together. Stay tuned to see how it's done. Our ingredients for the cookies consist of 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2 eggs, 1/2 cup of cocoa powder, 1 cup of butter, 2 cups of sugar, and 2 cups of flour. And to begin the process, I got my big mixing bowl out, dumping in the butter, which is a little bit stubborn. And once we got our butter in, just going to toss in the sugar. And now we're going to start kind of creaming the butter with the sugar. So just kind of a bit of a mixing process. And if your butter is hard as a rock, melt it before adding it. Or soften it up. Put it in the microwave for half a minute or so and it will soften up the block. And of course, because it's so firm still for me anyway, I'm just going to add my eggs a little bit prematurely. And that will kind of make it more of a slurry mixture once I start kind of mixing that around and working the butter and the sugar and with the eggs in there all into a nice creamy solution of complete excellence. This is quite a common thing in the art of cookery, is making the creamy, sugary butter mixture. And once we get that kind of combined and doing its own thing, I'm just going to throw a strainer over the top of the bowl. And then I'm going to pour in the baking powder and probably about half my flour. This is a very dry dough, so it's very difficult to mix. And so if you can partially mix it up before adding everything all together, you'll make your life a lot easier. And I'm just going to toss in the salt now before I forget and let the mixing process commence. Just going to keep stirring this and trying to keep it inside of the bowl and not shoot it all over the place, but as you can probably see, I do a little bit of that as well. And now that it's kind of cooperating a little bit, get the sifter back out, dump in the rest of the flour, and I'm going to toss in the cocoa powder now as well. And then we can begin our final mixing process. And our final mixing process is quite brutal. This is a very dry dough, as I said before. And the butter keeps sticking to my wooden spoon, so I have to use my metal spoon to clean off my wooden spoon before I can go all out on mixing this stuff up. I've sped it up quite a bit here. That wasn't too terrible, I guess. It was quite difficult to mix this. You might want to use like a dough knife on like a stand mixer or something, because it is fairly dry, but that's also part of what makes this type of cookie really good. Now these cookies, they'd be good on their own. You don't even need to do this fanciness with the stuffing, but we're going to do that anyway. Just make it so that they're not just chocolate cookies. They're fancy chocolate cookies, and I'm just going to hand roll these out and put them on the tray here. Now the mistake I made with this was I made the cookies quite large. I didn't think they would expand as much as they did, so I would recommend making about twice as many cookies with the amount of dough that I did here, or make the cookies half the size, I should say technically, but it doesn't take very long to roll them all out, but I guess it would take twice as long if you rolled out twice as many, so there's always that. But once we're done with that, we'll throw them in the oven at 350 degrees. And they should, in theory, cook in like 10 to 12 minutes. But it's similar to making sugar cookies in that they're kind of weird for telling when they're done. So I ended up cooking mine closer to 20 minutes. And they still were quite soft, even 10 minutes out of the oven. But after a couple hours, they started to harden up a little bit. But it made for a very soft, kind of tender cookie. Not a very crispy one, which was quite good, I guess. I mean, there's many different types of cookies, but that's what this style makes anyway. Unless, of course, you probably cook it longer, then eventually it will crisp right up, but for the way that I cooked it, that's just kind of how it went. For the stuffing, I'm going to use 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1 cup of confectionery sugar, and 1/2 cup of butter. Stove top, saucepan, medium heat, butter melt. And once we achieve total butter meltness, it's time to add in our sugar and our salt. And once they're added, then it's simply a case of stirring it and letting the butter kind of melt down a little bit. I cheated a little bit here and I added a little bit more sugar later on, but if you kind of just let it cook down on its own, the butter mixture will start to kind of bubble, and then as the moisture starts to get out of it or be removed from the boiling process, it kind of thickens up a little bit on its own. So there's also that method. Either way, you just keep stirring and make sure it doesn't burn, and you're left with something pretty good. And it also thickens up quite a bit after you take it off the heat, so that's what I ended up doing because the cookies take so long to harden after the baking procedure, similar to the sugar cookie. And now I'm going to somehow remove one of these off of the cookie tray, and then I'm going to apply my filling to the inside. This should be done after the cookies are fully hardened, as when I did it here it was quite difficult, and you want the bottom side of the pan, like the cookie that faces down towards the middle, so you have the tops on both sides. I didn't quite do that on my first one, but I did the rest that way, and I think they looked a little bit more pretty. So there's always that. And my sugar mixture, as you can see, after it cooled off, it really hardened down into a real sugar mixture. So there we go. That's my take on a stuffed cookie. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you make stuffed cookies like this, that's great. Like and subscribe if you like my content, and until next time, stay awesome.